The linoleum floor of the St. Jude's Home for Children always smelled of pine cleaner and boiled cabbage. It was a sterile, sharp scent that stuck to the back of the throat, a sensory reminder that this place was a station, not a destination. For 9-year-old Phoebe Lane, that smell was the perfume of waiting. Phoebe was not like the other children in the common room. While the boys played loud games of tag, their sneakers squeaking against the wax, and the girls braided each other's hair in the corner, discussing the latest pop songs, Phoebe sat by the window. She was small for her age, with knobby knees that knocked together when she stood, and pale blonde hair that always seemed to be escaping its ribbon. She held a sketchbook in her lap, her charcoal pencil hovering over the paper, capturing the gray clouds rolling over the Wyoming horizon. She was invisible to most, a quiet fixture in a loud world. But today, the air in the room shifted. The playful shrieks died down. The squeaking sneakers stopped. A hush fell over the room, heavy and sudden, like a blanket thrown over a birdcage. Mrs. Marjorie Klein, the head social worker, walked in first. Her heels clicked with a military cadence. Mrs. Klein was a woman who believed in order, in neat files, and in children who matched their prospective parents like accessories. She adjusted her glasses, her mouth set in a thin, disapproving line. Behind her, filling the doorway, was a mountain. His name was Wade Harlan. He wasn't just tall, he was wide, constructed of dense muscle and heavy bone. He wore a canvas jacket that had seen better decades, stained with oil and earth. His jeans were stiff, his boots caked with the dried mud of the cattle yards. He didn't carry a briefcase or a polite smile. He carried silence. His face was weathered, carved by the wind and sun into deep lines that looked like canyons. A scar ran through his left eyebrow, giving him a permanent expression of severity. He held his hat in hands that were the size of dinner plates, hands that looked like they could crush a stone without effort. "Stay back," whispered Tommy, a 12-year-old who considered himself the leader of the boys. "That's the guy from the Iron Creek Ranch. I heard he breaks wild horses just by looking at them. He looks like he eats rocks for breakfast," a girl named Sarah giggled nervously, hiding behind her friend. Phoebe didn't giggle. She watched. She saw Mrs. Klein gesture toward the office, her body language radiating discomfort. Mrs. Klein was small and bird-like next to him, fluttering with nervous energy. "Mr. Harlan?" Mrs. Klein said, her voice loud enough for the room to hear, though she tried to keep it professional. "As I stated on the phone, the suitability of your environment is still a matter of grave concern." Wade didn't speak. He just nodded, a single, sharp dip of his chin, and followed her. As he passed the common area, his heavy boots thudded against the floor. The vibrations traveled up the legs of the chairs. He didn't look at the children. He looked straight ahead, his jaw tight. "He's too rough," the whisper circle began as soon as the office door closed. "Did you see his knuckles?" Tommy whispered. "They're all scarred up. He's a brawler. Why would they let him in here?" "Maybe he needs a kid to work the fields," Sarah suggested, shivering. "Slave labor. That's what it is." Phoebe looked down at her sketchbook. She had been drawing a tree standing alone in a storm. She looked at the office door, where the frosted glass blurred the silhouette of the giant man. She felt a strange sensation in her chest. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was curiosity, mixed with a profound sense of inevitability. The orphanage was a place of noise. People talked about you, people talked at you, but rarely did anyone talk with you. Wade Harlan hadn't said a word, yet his presence was the loudest thing Phoebe had ever felt. Inside the office, the atmosphere was suffocating. Mrs. Klein sat behind her desk, using it as a barricade. Wade sat in the wooden chair opposite her. The chair creaked in protest under his weight. He placed his hat on his knee and waited. "Mr. Harlan," Mrs. Klein began, shuffling papers that she didn't need to shuffle. "I must be candid. My job is to ensure the emotional and physical safety of these children. You are a 40-year-old bachelor living on an isolated ranch 30 miles from the nearest town. Your references describe you as hard-working and honest, but also solitary, unyielding, and grim." Wade looked at her. His eyes were the color of slate. "I provide," he said. His voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder. It wasn't angry, but it lacked any musicality. It was a tool used only for necessary communication. "Providing food and shelter is the bare minimum," Mrs. Klein argued, leaning forward. "We have a child in mind who is delicate. Phoebe Lane. She comes from a background of neglect. She requires softness. She requires verbal affirmation. She requires a mother figure, or, at the very least, a father who knows how to nurture." She gestured at him, at his rough hands, his dirty jacket. "Look at yourself, Mr. Harlan. You are a man of the land. You deal with livestock and machinery. You break things and you fix things. Children are not things to be fixed. They are souls to be grown." It was a valid point, academically speaking. Mrs. Klein had degrees on her wall that told her exactly what a child needed, but she was reading the cover of the book, not the pages. Wade looked down at his hands. He turned them over, looking at the calluses that were thick and yellowed, the dirt permanently etched into his fingerprints. He knew what he looked like. He knew what the town thought of him. The hermit of Iron Creek, the stone man. "She needs a home," Wade said. "She needs a family," Klein corrected. "I have a home," Wade said, his voice flat. "I have room, I have means, and I ain't going anywhere." Mrs. Klein sighed, taking off her glasses. "The board has approved your application technically. Financially, you are stable. Your background check is clean, but I am marking my file with a strong objection. I believe this is a mismatch. I believe you are too rough for a girl like Phoebe. It won't work." Wade stood up. The room seemed to shrink. "Can I meet her?" Mrs. Klein pressed her lips together. "Fine. But if she shows one sign of hesitation, one sign of fear, I am calling this off. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Klein stood and walked to the door. She opened it and called out into the common room. "Phoebe? Phoebe Lane, please come here." Phoebe froze. Her charcoal pencil snapped in her hand. The other children went silent, turning to look at her. The whispers started again, louder this time. "The giant wants the mouse." Phoebe stood up. Her legs felt like water. She placed her sketchbook on the windowsill and walked toward the office. She was wearing a faded blue dress that was slightly too big for her, making her look even smaller. She hugged her arms around her chest, a defensive posture she had learned early in life. She stepped into the office. The air smelled of old paper and the metallic scent of rain and earth coming from the man. She looked up, and up. Wade Harlan was looking down at her. For the first time, his expression changed. It didn't soften into a smile. He didn't seem to have those muscles. But his eyes widened slightly. He saw the snapped pencil in her hand. He saw the charcoal dust on her fingers. He saw the way she held her breath, waiting for a blow that might never come. He didn't see a case file. He saw a terrified living thing. "Phoebe," Mrs. Klein said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "This is Mr. Harlan. He is interested in adoption." Phoebe nodded, not trusting her voice. Wade didn't move toward her. He didn't try to high-five her or ruffle her hair. He just stood there, respecting the space between them as if it were a physical boundary. "Hello," Phoebe whispered. Wade dipped his head. "Miss Phoebe." The formality of it surprised her. Adults usually called her Sweetie, or Honey, or simply You, Miss Phoebe. It was a title of respect, not endearment. "I live on a ranch," Wade said. He was speaking to her, but he was looking at her shoulder, as if looking her in the eye might scare her. "It's quiet. Got horses. Got a dog." Phoebe liked dogs. "What's the dog's name?" "Buster," Wade said. "He's old. Sleeps mostly." Phoebe looked at Mrs. Klein, then back at Wade. Are you mean?" Mrs. Klein gasped. "Phoebe, you don't ask." Wade raised a hand to stop Mrs. Klein. It was a command, silent and absolute. He looked at Phoebe, and for a second, he crouched down slightly, reducing his height by a fraction. "I ain't mean," Wade said slowly, "but I ain't soft. I don't know many jokes. I work hard, but I don't hit. And I don't lie." It was the most he had spoken all day. Phoebe looked at his hands. They were terrifying hands, but they were currently resting on his own knees, palms open. "Okay," Phoebe said. Mrs. Klein blinked. "Okay? Phoebe, are you sure? You don't have to decide now. We can—" "I want to go," Phoebe said, her voice gaining a sudden surprising strength. "I want to see the old dog." Mrs. Klein looked between the giant and the girl, flustered. The paperwork was signed. The legalities were cleared. She had no grounds to stop it, only her prejudice. "Very well," Mrs. Klein said, defeated but defiant. "But, Mr. Harlan, I will be conducting a home visit in 2 weeks. If I see one thing out of place, one sign of distress—" "2 weeks," Wade confirmed. He turned to Phoebe. "Get your things." The process of leaving the orphanage was usually a chaotic affair of gathering meager belongings and saying tearful or indifferent goodbyes. For Phoebe, it was quiet. She had one small suitcase and her sketchbook. She owned very little of the world. As she packed, the other children hovered in the doorway of the dormitory. "You're crazy," Tommy said, shaking his head. "Did you hear his voice? It sounds like rocks grinding together. He's going to make you work in the barn until you drop." "He's scary," Sarah added. "Mrs. Klein said he lives alone. That means no mom. Who's going to cook? Who's going to wash your clothes?" Phoebe folded her only sweater. "I can wash my own clothes," she said softly. "You're making a mistake," Tommy insisted. "Wait for a nice family, one with a minivan and a golden retriever. Not that." Phoebe didn't answer. She knew that nice families wanted babies. They wanted toddlers they could mold. They didn't want 9-year-olds who drew storms and didn't talk much. Wade Harlan was the first person who hadn't looked at her with pity. He had looked at her with recognition. She walked out to the reception area. Wade was waiting by the door. He had put his hat back on, casting a shadow over his eyes. When he saw her, he didn't rush to take her bag. He waited to see if she could carry it. When he saw she struggled slightly with the handle, he stepped forward. "I can take it," he said. "I got it," Phoebe said, straining slightly. Wade stopped. He didn't insist. He didn't grab it from her to prove his strength. He nodded. All right. This was the first test, though neither of them knew it. He was allowing her agency. Mrs. Klein watched from her desk, shaking her head. "See?" she thought. "He's not a gentleman. He's letting a child carry a heavy load." Mrs. Klein walked them to the exit. "Phoebe, do you have the emergency number?" "Yes, Mrs. Klein." "Mr. Harlan, remember, 2 weeks." "Yes, ma'am." They stepped out of the heavy oak doors of St. Jude's and into the biting Wyoming wind. The parking lot was gravel, and it had rained the night before. The ground was a treacherous mix of mud and loose stones. Wade's truck was parked at the far end. It was a massive, beat-up Ford F-250, rusted around the wheel wells, painted a dull, matte black. It looked like a war machine compared to the sedans of the social workers. Wade walked with long, purposeful strides. Phoebe had to almost run to keep up with him, her small legs pumping, her suitcase banging against her knee. "He walks too fast," Mrs. Klein muttered from the doorway, watching them. "He doesn't even notice her struggling. He's leaving her behind already." It did look that way. Wade was a creature of momentum. He was used to walking alone. He was halfway to the truck when he realized the crunch of footsteps behind him had stopped. He stopped and turned around. Phoebe was 10 feet behind him, breathing hard, adjusting her grip on the suitcase. Wade hesitated. He looked like he was processing a complex math problem. Right. Short legs. He waited for her to catch up. He didn't say sorry. Apologies weren't a language he spoke fluently. But he slowed his pace significantly. They reached the truck. It was high off the ground. For Phoebe, the door handle was at eye level. "Throw the bag in the back," Wade said, gesturing to the truck bed. Phoebe swung her suitcase up. It landed with a thud next to a coil of barbed wire and a toolbox. "Climb in," he said. Phoebe opened the passenger door. The seat was incredibly high. She placed her foot on the running board, grabbed the handle, and pulled. She slipped. Her foot couldn't find traction on the muddy metal step. She tried again. Slipped again. She felt a wave of shame hot enough to burn her cheeks. She was weak. He was strong. He needed someone useful. And she couldn't even get into the car. Wade stood by the driver's side, watching her. He didn't move initially. He was observing. Is she giving up? No, she's trying. But on the third try, her hand slipped from the handle. She fell backward, landing hard on the wet gravel. "Oh!" she cried out, more in shock than pain. From the doorway of the orphanage, Mrs. Klein took a step forward. "See?" she shouted. "Mr. Harlan!" But before Mrs. Klein could take 3 steps, Wade was moving. For a big man, he moved with terrifying speed. One moment, he was by the driver's door. The next, he was looming over Phoebe. Phoebe flinched. She squeezed her eyes shut. She expected a scolding. "Look at you, clumsy! Get up! Stop crying!" The gravel crunched. The sound wasn't coming from above her. It was next to her. Phoebe opened her eyes. The world had tilted. The giant wasn't looming over her. Wade Harlan was on his knees in the mud. He didn't care about his jeans. He didn't care about the puddle soaking into his shins. He had dropped to her level instantly. He was no longer a mountain, he was a shelter. He was wearing thick leather work gloves, the kind used for handling barbed wire and hot engines. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled the right glove off. Then the left. He tucked them into his pocket. He did this to show her his skin, to show her he wasn't a machine. He extended a hand. It was scarred, rough, and stained with the permanent ink of hard labor. But he held it out, palm up, waiting, not grabbing. "You hurt?" he asked. His voice was different. The rumble was softer, pitched lower to avoid startling her. Phoebe stared at him. I slipped. "Running boards are slick," Wade said. "My fault. Should have cleaned 'em." He took the blame. In her 9 years of life, adults rarely took the blame for a child's mistake. "I can't get up," Phoebe whispered, her ankle throbbing slightly. "Don't need to yet," Wade said. He looked at her with an intensity that was searching, not judging. "Everyone says I'm rough, Phoebe. They told you that?" Phoebe nodded. "I am," Wade admitted. He looked at his own hand. "I break horses. I mend fences. I fight weather. That makes a man hard on the outside." He looked her in the eye. "But you ain't a horse, and you ain't a fence." He moved his hand closer, but stopped an inch from her shoulder. "I don't know how to do this," he said, his voice cracking slightly with a vulnerability that shocked Mrs. Klein. who was now frozen near the entrance. "I don't know how to be a dad, but I know how to spot fear. And I know you're scared I'm going to be too hard." Phoebe held her breath. "I'll learn your way," Wade said. It was a promise, a contract spoken in the mud. "I can be gentle. It just takes me a minute to switch gears." He waited. Phoebe reached out and placed her small, pale hand into his massive, calloused palm. His fingers closed around hers, not like a trap, but like a cradle. He didn't pull her. He provided stability so she could pull herself up. As she stood, wobbling on her ankle, Wade didn't let go. "Can you walk?" "I think so." "Don't think." "No." He paused. "If you can't, I'll carry you, but only if you ask." "I can walk," Phoebe said. "Good." He guided her to the truck. This time, he didn't just watch. He placed his broad hands under her arms and effortlessly lifted her, placing her gently onto the seat as if she were made of glass. He buckled her seatbelt. His hands were huge near her face, smelling of diesel and soap, but his movements were surgical in their precision. He didn't graze her skin. He didn't make her flinch. He closed the door with a firm click, not a slam. Wade walked around to the driver's side. He looked at Mrs. Klein, who was standing in the rain, her mouth slightly open. Wade touched the brim of his hat, a polite final gesture, and climbed in. The engine roared to life, a deep, guttural sound that vibrated through the seat. To Phoebe, it felt powerful. "It's a long drive," Wade said as he put the truck in gear. "You hungry?" Phoebe shook her head. "Thirsty?" "No, sir." "Okay." They pulled out of the parking lot. Phoebe watched the orphanage disappear in the side mirror. She watched Mrs. Klein disappear. She watched her old life shrink until it was nothing but a gray smudge against the gray sky. She looked at the man beside her. He was gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity, staring at the road. He looked terrifying. He looked dangerous. But Phoebe looked down at her hand, the one he had held. It was still warm. She realized then that the warnings were wrong. He wasn't too rough. He was just heavy. And sometimes, when the wind was blowing hard enough to knock you down, you needed something heavy to anchor you to the earth. "Mr. Harlan?" she asked softly. "Wade," he corrected. "Call me Wade." "Wade. Do you have a TV?" Wade glanced at her, then back to the road. "Got a radio and a window. That's usually enough show for me." Phoebe smiled, just a tiny bit. It was going to be a very different life. The truck sped up, heading toward the open plains of Wyoming, toward Iron Creek, and toward the storm that would change everything. The drive to Iron Creek was not measured in minutes, but in the gradual disappearance of civilization. The paved road gave way to asphalt patchwork, which eventually surrendered to gravel, and finally to hard-packed red dirt. The landscape opened up like a giant exhaling lung. The sky in Wyoming wasn't just a ceiling, it was a presence, vast and domineering, pressing down on the flat, sage-covered earth. Phoebe watched the telephone poles whip by. They were the only vertical lines in a horizontal world. "Almost there," Wade grunted. It was the first thing he had said in 40 minutes. He slowed the truck down, turning off the main dirt road onto a narrow track marked by a cattle guard. A grid of metal pipes over a ditch designed to keep cows in, but which rumbled the truck so violently Phoebe's teeth clicked together. Above them, a weathered wooden arch read, "Iron Creek." The paint was peeling, exposing the gray wood underneath. The ranch was not the picturesque scene from a storybook. There were no white picket fences or red barns with perfectly painted trim. It was a functional fortress of survival. The barn was massive, built of corrugated metal that had rusted to the color of dried blood. There were tractors that looked like sleeping dinosaurs, half covered in tarps. Fences stretched out endlessly, barbed wire glinting in the fading sun. And the house. It was a single-story ranch house, sided in simple clapboard that might have been white once, but was now a dusty beige. The porch sagged slightly on the left side. It looked lonely. Wade parked the truck. The silence that followed the engine cutting off was deafening. It wasn't the quiet of a library. It was the quiet of emptiness. The wind whistled through the gaps in the barn, a low, mournful note. "Home," Wade said, though he said it more like a question than a statement. He got out and grabbed her suitcase. Phoebe climbed down, managing the height better this time, though she still gripped the handle until her knuckles turned white. As her boots hit the dirt, a low growl emanated from the porch shadows. Phoebe froze. "Buster, knock it off," Wade said, his voice dropping to that command tone. A dog emerged from the gloom. He was an Australian shepherd mix, but time had stolen his agility. His coat was matted with burrs, one ear was tattered from some long-ago fight with a coyote, and his eyes were milky with cataracts. He didn't wag his tail. He stiffened, sniffing the air, suspicious of the new scent. "He's blind in one eye and deaf in one ear," Wade explained, walking up the steps. "Don't sneak up on him. Let him smell you first." Phoebe stood still. She held out her hand, just like Wade had done for her. The old dog approached slowly, his nose twitching. He sniffed her fingers, his whiskers tickling her skin. He let out a heavy sigh, his body relaxing, and leaned his head against her leg. "He likes you," Wade noted, unlocking the front door. "He usually bites strangers' boots." They entered the house. If the outside was lonely, the inside was a museum of a bachelor's life. It was clean, but stark. The floors were bare wood. The furniture was heavy leather, cracked with age. There were no pictures on the walls, no throw pillows, no rugs. The air smelled of wood stove ash and stale coffee. It was a house designed for sleeping and eating, not for living. "That's your room." Wade pointed to a door off the kitchen. Phoebe walked over and pushed the door open. It was a small room. There was a single bed with a blue wool blanket, a wooden dresser, and a window that looked out over the horse pasture. On the bed sat a small, stuffed bear. It looked brand new, the tag still on its ear. It looked ridiculously out of place in this house of iron and wood. Wade stood in the kitchen, rubbing the back of his neck. Mrs. Klein said, "Kids need toys. I bought that at the general store." Phoebe walked over to the bear. It was soft. Cheap, but soft. She picked it up. "Thank you," she said. "I ain't got a cook," Wade said abruptly, retreating to his comfort zone of logistics. "I make stew. I make eggs, sometimes steak. You eat meat?" "Yes." "Good. Wash up. Sink's in the bathroom. Don't use the hot water too long. The heater's temperamental." That first night, they sat at the small kitchen table eating beef stew from cans. The only sound was the scraping of spoons against ceramic and the ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway. Phoebe watched Wade eat. He ate with efficiency, head down, shoveling fuel into the furnace. He didn't make small talk. He didn't ask her about her favorite color or school. He seemed to be struggling to figure out what a father was supposed to do. "Wade?" He looked up, startled. "Yeah? Is it always this dark out here?" Wade looked out the window. Outside, the world was pitch black. There were no streetlights, no neighbors' porch lights, just an endless, consuming void. "Stars," Wade grunted. "You wait. Clouds will clear. You'll see the stars." He stood up and took her bowl. "Bedtime. I work at sunup. That means 5 a.m. You don't have to get up, but I'm loud." Phoebe went to her room. She closed the door. She changed into her nightgown and climbed into the bed. The wool blanket was scratchy, unlike the cotton sheets at the orphanage. The house creaked and groaned as the temperature dropped. She clutched the cheap teddy bear to her chest. She felt like an astronaut who had landed on a desolate planet. Wade wasn't mean, but he was a planet with no atmosphere. He was distant, hard, and terrifyingly silent. She didn't cry. She just lay there, listening to the wind hunt around the corners of the house, wondering if she would survive the gravity of this place. The next 3 days were a crash course in the reality of ranch life. Phoebe learned quickly that Wade Harlan did not live in the same time zone as the rest of the world. He lived in ranch time. Morning didn't start with an alarm clock. It started with the heavy thud of his boots on the floorboards at 4:45 a.m. It started with the smell of strong black coffee that permeated the house like a fog. Phoebe, used to the strict schedule of the orphanage, woke up with him. On the second day, she wandered into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from her eyes, clutching her sketchbook. Wade was standing by the stove, frying bacon in a cast-iron skillet. He looked at her surprised. "You're up," he said. "The floor shakes when you walk," she whispered. Wade looked down at his boots. "Right. Sorry." He plated the bacon and 2 eggs. He put the plate in front of her. "Eat. I got fences to check. Can I come?" Wade hesitated. He looked at her thin arms, her pale skin. He looked at the window where the wind was already whipping up dust devils. "It's dirty work, Phoebe. Dangerous. Snakes. Barbed wire. I can watch," she said. "I can draw." Wade sighed. "Put your boots on. Don't touch anything unless I say so. And if I yell, 'Move,' you don't look, you don't ask why, you just move. Understand?" "Yes, sir." That day, Phoebe saw the version of Wade that the town feared. They drove the truck out to the north pasture. A section of fence had been knocked down by a rogue bull elk during the night. The wire was twisted. The cedar posts snapped like toothpicks. Wade didn't complain. He didn't sigh. He got out of the truck and attacked the problem. Phoebe sat on the tailgate, sketching. She watched him work. He used a heavy steel bar to dig a new hole. He slammed it into the rocky earth with a violence that made her flinch. Thud, thud, thud. His muscles corded under his shirt. Sweat dripped from his nose. He grabbed the barbed wire with his gloved hands, the same gloves he had taken off to help her, and pulled it tight. The wire sang with tension. At one point, the wire stretcher slipped. The metal clamp snapped back and hit Wade in the forearm. Phoebe gasped. "Wade!" He didn't scream. He just gritted his teeth, his face turning a dark shade of red, and let out a hiss of breath through his nose. He shook his arm out, checked that no bone was broken, and went right back to work. He was impervious to pain. It scared her. If he didn't feel pain, how could he understand hers? "Bring me the pliers," he called out. Phoebe scrambled off the tailgate. She ran to the toolbox. There were 3 different tools that looked like pliers. She grabbed the biggest ones and ran to him. She held them out. Wade looked at them. "Those are cutters. Need the fencing pliers, the ones with the hammer head." I don't know which ones," she stammered, feeling useless. Wade wiped his forehead with his sleeve. He looked at the sun, estimating the time. He was behind schedule. "Never mind," he grumbled. He walked past her, his stride long and heavy, grabbed the right tool, and went back to the fence. He didn't yell at her, but the dismissal hurt more than a shout. It was a confirmation of her fear. "I am in the way. I am a burden." Phoebe went back to the truck. She opened her sketchbook. She didn't draw the landscape. She drew Wade. She drew him as a giant made of stone, holding up a falling fence, with a tiny girl standing in his shadow, invisible. Later that afternoon, they returned to the house. Wade was covered in dust and grease. He smelled of hard labor. "Go wash up," he said. "I gotta feed the horses." Phoebe stood in the kitchen. She wanted to help. She wanted to prove she wasn't just another mouth to feed. She saw the pile of dirty dishes in the sink. "I can do this," she thought. She dragged a chair over to the sink so she could reach the faucet. She turned the water on. It sputtered and spat, then came out hot. She poured soap onto the sponge. She picked up the heavy cast-iron skillet. It was slick with bacon grease. It was heavier than she expected. Her wrists trembled. The skillet slipped from her soapy grip. Crash. It hit the floor with the sound of a gong. The heavy iron cracked one of the floor tiles and spun, sending greasy water splashing across the cabinets and Phoebe's dress. The back door slammed open. Wade rushed in, his eyes wide, adrenaline pumping. He thought she was hurt. He thought the stove had exploded. "What happened?" he shouted. His voice was loud, projected from his diaphragm, the voice he used to command cattle across a canyon. Phoebe shrank back against the counter, covering her ears. She made herself small. In the orphanage, a shout meant trouble. A shout meant you were bad. "I'm sorry," she cried, tears instantly springing to her eyes. "I tried to wash it. I'm sorry." Wade stopped. He saw the pan on the floor. He saw the cracked tile. He saw the girl trembling like a leaf in a gale, terrified of him. The adrenaline drained out of him, leaving him feeling heavy and clumsy. He realized his volume had been a weapon. He took a breath. He lowered his voice. "Phoebe." She didn't look up. "It's just a pan," he said. "Cast iron don't break. The floor, well, the floor's old anyway." He walked over slowly. He picked up the pan. "I was trying to help," she sobbed. "I know," Wade said. He stood there, holding the greasy pan, looking at this fragile creature. He wanted to hug her, to tell her it was okay, but he was covered in muck, and he didn't know how to initiate a hug without it feeling like a capture. "You don't have to earn your keep, kid," he said gruffly. "You ain't an employee. You live here." He set the pan in the sink. "Go change your dress. I'll clean this up." He turned his back to her to start wiping the floor. He heard her run to her room and close the door. Wade stared at the cracked tile. He felt a dull ache in his chest. Mrs. Klein's voice echoed in his head. "He's too rough. It won't work." He was trying. But every time he moved, something seemed to break. A week passed. The dynamic in the house shifted from awkwardness to a tense coexistence. Wade walked on eggshells, trying to be quieter, trying to make his massive presence less intrusive. Phoebe tried to be invisible, drawing in her room, avoiding anything that might cause an accident. It was a functional relationship, but it wasn't a family. It was two strangers trapped in a house, one afraid of breaking the other afraid of being broken. The tension came to a head on a Thursday. Mrs. Klein called. Wade held the phone receiver like it was a venomous snake. Phoebe sat at the table pretending to draw, but listening to every word. "Yes, ma'am," Wade said into the phone. "She's fine, eating good." "No, she ain't enrolled in school yet. Starts Monday." "Yes, she has her own room." Pause. No problems. She's quiet." Pause. "Next Friday?" "Yeah, I'll be here." He hung up the phone. He looked tired. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper. "She's coming to check on us next week," Wade said to the room, not specifically to Phoebe. "Is she going to take me back?" Phoebe asked. Her voice was small. Wade looked at her. "Do you want her to?" It was the most important question he had asked. Phoebe thought about the orphanage, the noise, the smell of cabbage, the feeling of being a file number. Then she looked at Wade. He was scary, yes. He was loud. But there was food. There was the dog, Buster. and there was the way he had knelt in the mud. "No," Phoebe said. "Then we gotta make sure this place looks right," Wade said. He looked around the barren kitchen. "We need, I don't know, normal things." The pressure was mounting. Wade became more focused, more intense. He worked harder during the day, trying to fix up the yard, trying to make the ranch look less like a scrapyard. That afternoon, the sky began to change. In Wyoming, storms don't sneak up on you. They announce themselves. The horizon turned a bruised purple. The wind changed direction, bringing the scent of ozone and wet sage. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an hour. "Storm's coming," Wade said, watching the sky from the porch. "A bad one. Power lines might go down." He looked at Phoebe. "I gotta get the generator ready, and I gotta move the calves into the lower barn. It's gonna get cold." "Can I help?" Phoebe asked. She wanted to be useful before Mrs. Klein came. She wanted to prove this was her home. Wade looked at the darkening sky. "The calves are skittish, but I could use someone to hold the gate." "I can do that," Phoebe said eagerly. They went out to the corral. The wind was whipping Phoebe's hair across her face. The cattle were restless, lowing and bumping into each other. "Okay," Wade shouted over the wind. "Stand by that lever. When I get them in the chute, you pull it down. Just pull it down hard. That locks the gate so they don't run back out." "Okay," Phoebe shouted back. Wade went into the pen. He moved with practiced aggression, whistling and waving his arms to drive the young calves toward the barn. "Hiya! Get on! Move!" The calves panicked. They surged toward the gate. "Now, Phoebe! Pull it!" Wade yelled. Phoebe grabbed the lever. It was cold iron. She pulled. It didn't move. It was rusted and heavy. "Pull it!" Wade roared, seeing the calves turning back. Phoebe put her whole weight on it. She gritted her teeth. "Please, please move." But she was 9 years old, and the lever was built for a man. The calves saw the opening. They stampeded back out, rushing past Phoebe. One of them, a 300-pound animal, brushed against her, knocking her into the mud. Wade watched the work of 3 hours scatter back into the field. He slammed his hat onto the ground. "Damn it!" The word was lost in the wind, but the action wasn't. He stormed over to the gate. He wasn't mad at her. He was mad at himself for asking a child to do a man's job, mad at the rust, mad at the coming storm. But to Phoebe, who was sitting in the mud clutching her bruised arm, he looked like a monster. Wade grabbed the lever and jerked it down with a savage clank. He looked down at her. He saw the fear in her eyes, the absolute, primal terror. He froze. "Phoebe, are you hurt?" he asked, reaching for her. Phoebe scrambled backward, crab-walking through the mud away from him. She got to her feet and ran. She ran toward the house, her small legs pumping, disappearing into the gloom. Wade stood there, the rain starting to fall in heavy, icy drops. He looked at his hands. "She's afraid of me," he realized. Mrs. Klein was right. "I'm too rough." He left the calves in the field. He didn't care about them anymore. He picked up his hat and walked toward the house, the weight of his failure pressing down on him harder than the storm. Inside, the house was dark. The power had already flickered and died. "Phoebe," he called out softly. There was no answer. The wind howled outside, shaking the window panes. The storm had arrived, and inside the house, a different kind of darkness had fallen. The Wyoming sky had turned into a bruised canvas of violet and charcoal. The wind was no longer just a current of air. It was a physical weight, slamming against the north side of the house with the force of a freight train. The old timber frame of the ranch house groaned under the assault, the wood contracting and expanding like a living ribcage fighting for breath. Inside, the darkness was absolute. The power lines had snapped 3 miles down the road. severed by a falling cottonwood. There was no hum of the refrigerator, no comforting buzz of the electric clock. Just the roar of the wind and the aggressive rattle of the window panes. Wade stood in the kitchen. He had removed his muddy boots, his socks padding silently on the cold floor. He held a heavy-duty flashlight in his hand, but he kept it pointed at the floor, creating a pool of diffused light rather than a piercing beam. "Phoebe?" he called out. His voice was swallowed by a sudden clap of thunder that shook the floorboards beneath his feet. He winced. He knew what that sound did to animals. He had seen 1,000-pound steers trample fences in panic at the sound of thunder. He could only imagine what it was doing to a 9-year-old girl who already felt like the world was out to get her. He moved toward the hallway. The house felt different in the dark. It felt larger, cavernous. Every shadow looked like a threat. He reached Phoebe's door. It was shut tight. He raised his hand to knock, then hesitated. His hand was huge. A knock might sound like a hammer. He lowered his hand and leaned close to the wood. "Phoebe, lights are out. It's just the storm." No answer. Then he heard it. It was a sound faint enough to be missed if you weren't listening for it. A high-pitched, ragged gasping. It was the sound of air being sucked in, but not let out. Wade turned the knob gently. It wasn't locked. He pushed the door open. The beam of his flashlight cut across the room. The bed was empty. The blue wool blanket was dragged onto the floor. He swept the light to the corner, between the dresser and the wall. There she was. Phoebe was curled into a ball so tight she looked half her size. She had the cheap teddy bear pressed over her ears, her eyes squeezed shut. She was rocking back and forth, vibrating with tremors that had nothing to do with the cold. She was hyperventilating. Wade had seen fear before. He had seen men afraid of breaking bones, afraid of failing banks, afraid of losing crops. But this was different. This wasn't fear of a thing. This was a system failure. This was a child whose internal alarms were ringing so loud she couldn't hear reality. He took a step forward. "Phoebe." Another crack of thunder, closer this time, like a whip cracking the sky open. Phoebe screamed. It wasn't a word. It was a raw, primal noise of pure terror. She kicked out at the air, scrambling further into the corner as if trying to merge with the drywall. "Go away!" she shrieked. "Go away!" Wade froze. He felt a sharp pain in his chest. She wasn't just afraid of the storm. She was afraid of him. She was afraid of the man who had slammed the hat on the ground, the man who had yelled at the gate. He stood there, a giant in the dark, realizing that his strength, the thing he had relied on for 40 years, was useless here. He couldn't wrestle the fear out of her. He couldn't build a fence around it. He had to do something he had never done. He had to become small. Wade backed up. He didn't leave the room, but he retreated to the doorway, giving her 15 feet of space. He set the heavy flashlight on the dresser, pointing it up at the ceiling. The light bounced off the white paint, filling the room with a soft, ambient glow instead of a harsh beam. It looked like moonlight, gentle and gray. Then Wade did the unthinkable for a man with bad knees and a stiff back. He sat down on the floor. He crossed his legs. He took off his heavy canvas jacket and laid it beside him, revealing his plain flannel shirt. He rolled up his sleeves, showing his forearms, showing he had no weapons, no anger. He waited. Phoebe was still gasping, her chest heaving up and down in a rhythm that was too fast to sustain. Hic, gasp, hic, gasp. Educational moment. The physiology of co-regulation. Wade didn't know the medical terms. He didn't know about the amygdala hijacking the brain or the parasympathetic nervous system, but he knew livestock. He knew that when a horse is panicked, its heart rate skyrockets, its vision tunnels, and it loses the ability to process commands. If the handler is tense, the horse stays tense. The only way to bring a horse down is to bring yourself down first. It's called co-regulation, lending your calm to someone who has lost theirs. Wade closed his eyes. He took a deep breath in through his nose, exaggerating the sound. It was a loud, rushing inhale. He held it for 3 seconds. Then he exhaled through his mouth, a long, slow whoosh. He didn't look at her. He just breathed. In, 2, 3. Out. 2, 3, 4. The sound was rhythmic, predictable. In the chaos of the storm, it was a steady metronome. Phoebe's gasping hitched. She didn't stop, but the rhythm broke. Her brain, seeking any pattern in the noise, latched onto the sound of his breath. "I ain't gonna touch you, Phoebe," Wade said. His voice was a low rumble, blending with the thunder rather than competing with it. "I'm just sitting. My knees hurt too much to stand." He took another deep breath. Whoosh! Phoebe peeked over the top of the teddy bear. She saw the giant sitting on the floor. He looked ridiculous. He looked like a mountain trying to be a molehill. "Why are you breathing like that?" she choked out between gasps. "Trying to slow my heart down," Wade lied. "The thunder. It scares me a little." Phoebe stopped rocking. "You?" "Yeah, loud noises," Wade muttered. "Make me jump." It was a lie, but it was a bridge. He was offering her a shared vulnerability. "It makes me feel like I can't breathe," Phoebe whispered. "I know," Wade said. "Like your chest is in a vice. Like the air is too thin." He looked at the wall, not at her. Direct eye contact was aggressive. Side-eye was safe. "I got a trick for it," Wade said. "Something I learned from an old horse I had. A Mustang." Phoebe didn't say anything, but her breathing slowed just a fraction. She was listening. "You like horses?" Wade asked. I drew one once. This horse." "His name was Iron," Wade began. He shifted slightly, getting comfortable on the hard floor. "He was the wildest thing in the valley. Nobody could get near him. If you came within 10 feet, he'd kick the barn down. Everyone said he was mean. Everyone said, 'Put him down, Wade. He's broken.' The wind howled outside, shaking the window frame, but Wade's voice remained steady, a counterweight to the storm. "But he wasn't mean," Wade said softly. "He was just convinced the world was gonna hurt him, and he had a right to think that, 'cause the world had hurt him before." Phoebe lowered the bear slightly. She recognized the story. She felt the story. "What did you do?" she asked. Wade picked up a piece of lint from the carpet and examined it. "Well, I stopped trying to catch him. I just went into the corral, sat in the dirt, kinda like this, and I told him the truth. The room was dim, the shadows stretching long against the walls. The storm raged on, but inside the square footage of the bedroom, the atmosphere had shifted. It was no longer a place of panic. It was a campfire circle. "What truth?" Phoebe asked. Her voice was no longer a shriek. It was a small, curious tremor. Wade looked at his hands, those massive, scarred hands that had terrified her hours ago. "I told him," Wade said, "that I wasn't going to be soft. I told him I was rough. I told him my hands were hard, and my voice was loud." He paused, glancing at her. "But I also told him that hard hands are good for keeping things safe. I told him that a fence feels like a cage until the wolves come. Then it feels like a fortress." Phoebe sniffled. She wiped her nose on the bear's ear. "Did he believe you?" "Not at first," Wade admitted. "Trust ain't a light switch, Phoebe. You don't just flip it on. It's like growing corn. You plant the seed, you water it, you wait. And sometimes a storm comes and knocks it flat. And you think it's dead." He looked at her directly now, His face was open, the severity of his brow smoothed out by the soft light. But roots are strong, stronger than the wind. He shifted his weight. You know what I did with iron when the thunder came? We breathed. Animals, they feel your heartbeat. If I was scared, he was scared. If I was calm, he figured he could be calm too. Wade extended his hand, palm up, resting it on his knee. Try it with me, just once. It sends a message to your brain that says, hey, we ain't running from a bear right now. We're just sitting. Phoebe hesitated. Her chest still hurt. Her eyes were still puffy. But the panic, that cold, sharp spike in her gut, had dulled into a manageable ache. Okay, she whispered. In through the nose, Wade instructed, closing his eyes again. Deep. Fill up your belly, not just your chest. He inhaled. 1, 2, 3. Phoebe mimicked him. Her breath shuddered, jagged and uneven. That's it, Wade encouraged without opening his eyes. Now, let it out slow. Like you're blowing out a candle, but you don't want the flame to go out. Just make it flicker. Phoebe exhaled. Whoosh. Again. They sat there for 5 minutes. The giant man and the small girl. Inhale. Exhale. With every breath, the tension in the room evaporated. The adrenaline that had flooded Phoebe's system began to recede, leaving her exhausted. Iron, Phoebe said softly. Is he still here? Wade opened his eyes. A sad smile touched his lips. No, he passed on a few years back. Old age. He had a good life. He never liked anyone else but me. But he knew I'd never let anything hurt him. Wade looked at the space between them. The 3 feet of carpet. I yelled at the gate today, Wade said. He didn't offer an excuse. He just stated the fact. Phoebe nodded. I was frustrated, Wade said. The rust, the rain, my own slowness. But I shouldn't have been loud near you. That's my bad habit. I've lived alone a long time. I forget how loud I am. I couldn't pull the lever, Phoebe confessed, looking down. I'm too weak. No, Wade said firmly. You ain't weak. You're small. There's a difference. That lever takes 100 pounds of pressure. I was a fool to ask you to do a man's job. He leaned forward slightly. You ain't here to be a ranch hand, Phoebe. You ain't here to earn your keep. You're here to be a kid. And if the calves run off, let 'em run. I can catch cows. I can't catch a broken trust. Phoebe looked at him. She saw the dirt on his shirt. She saw the genuine regret in his slate-gray eyes. For the first time, she didn't see a monster. She saw a man who was clumsy with his heart, but who was trying harder than anyone had ever tried for her. She moved. She crawled out from the corner. She didn't run to him. That would be a movie moment. And this was real life. She crawled to the edge of the bed and grabbed her pillow. Then she dragged it over to where Wade was sitting. She placed the pillow on the floor, about 2 feet away from him. She sat on it, clutching her bear. Can you keep the light on? She asked. Until the batteries die, Wade promised. And I got spares. Okay. She leaned her head back against the dresser. Wade stayed where he was, a silent sentinel between her and the door, between her and the storm. Wade. Yeah? I'm not scared of the dark. I'm scared of the loud. I got it, Wade nodded. We keep it quiet. We keep it low. They sat in silence for a while, the storm raging outside but powerless to enter the fortress of calm they had built. You hungry? Wade asked eventually. Stove's gas. I can heat up soup. Phoebe realized she was starving. Tomato? Tomato it is. Wade stood up. His knees cracked loudly. He winced. Phoebe giggled. It was a tiny sound, dry and rusty, but it was a laugh. Your knees are loud, she said. Wade looked down at her. a glimmer of amusement in his eyes. Yeah, everything about me is loud. I'm working on it. He held out a hand, not to pull her up, but just to offer. Phoebe looked at it. The hand that fixed fences, the hand that broke horses, the hand that had turned into a cradle. She didn't take it. She wasn't ready for that yet. But she reached out and tapped his index finger with her own. A high five of the smallest magnitude. "Soup," she said. "Soup," he agreed. As they walked to the kitchen, the flashlight beam bobbing ahead of them, the storm outside seemed to lose its teeth. The wind was still blowing, but inside, the air was safe. The morning after the storm, the world was scrubbed clean. The Wyoming sun rose with a brilliance that hurt the eyes, reflecting off the puddles that dotted the ranch yard like scattered coins. The wind had died down to a whisper, leaving behind a silence that felt peaceful, not empty. Phoebe woke up in her bed. The power had returned sometime in the night. The digital clock on her dresser blinked 12 hard in bright red, demanding to be reset. She sat up, clutching the bear. She remembered the flashlight. She remembered the breathing. She remembered the story of the horse named Iron. She walked out into the hallway. The house smelled of coffee and sawdust. Wade was not in the kitchen. Usually, he would be out by 5 a.m., already miles away on the tractor. But today, his hat was still on the hook. Phoebe looked at the kitchen table. In the center of the scarred oak table, where usually only salt and pepper shakers stood, sat a small wooden box. It wasn't a jewelry box. It was a rough-hewn box made of cedar, likely sanded down from a scrap of fence post. It smelled of fresh wood. Underneath it was a pile of crumpled papers, evidence of many failed attempts. Leaning against the box was a single sheet of notebook paper, folded in half. Phoebe walked over. Her bare feet were cold on the floor. She picked up the paper. The handwriting was atrocious. Blocky, jagged letters written with a heavy hand that was used to gripping hammers, not pens. The ink was dark, pressed so hard it nearly tore through the paper. It was titled, "House Rules." Phoebe read it, her lips moving silently. Rule 1. Nobody yells at Phoebe, not even when the cows get out. If I yell, I owe $1 to the jar. Next to the note was a glass jar with a single, crisp dollar bill already inside. A preemptive fine for the day before. Rule 2. Scared is not the same as weak. You can be scared. You just can't quit. Rule 3. I don't know how to do hair. You gotta teach me. I will learn. Rule 4. Hugs are optional. You decide. I wait. And at the bottom, signed with a flourish that looked like a signature on a bank loan, I ain't soft, but I will be safe. Wade Phoebe stared at the paper. Her chest felt tight, but not the bad kind of tight. It was the feeling of a balloon expanding. She looked at the crumpled papers in the trash can. She imagined Wade, the giant of Iron Creek, sitting at this tiny table in the middle of the night, hand cramping, writing and rewriting these rules until he got them right. He had fought with the pen the way he fought with the wire fencing, and he had won. The back door opened. Wade walked in. He looked exhausted. His eyes were red-rimmed, and he hadn't shaved. He was carrying a toolbox. He stopped when he saw her holding the paper. He suddenly looked shy, shifting his weight from one boot to the other. "Morning," he grunted. "Morning," Phoebe said. Can you read my writing? I haven't written much since school." "I can read it," Phoebe said. She looked at the jar. "You put $1 in." "I yelled yesterday," Wade said. "At the gate. It was wrong. A deal's a deal." Phoebe looked at him. "You don't have to pay me." "Yes, I do," Wade said seriously. "Rules are what keep the roof up. Without rules, it's just a pile of wood." He walked over to the sink to wash his hands. "Mrs. Klein is coming today. I got the date mixed up. She called the general store. Said she's coming early to check storm damage." Phoebe felt a jolt of anxiety. "Today?" "In an hour," Wade said. He turned off the water and dried his hands on a rag. He looked at Phoebe. You be you. If you want to go back, you tell her. I won't be mad. I'll understand. This ain't an easy life." Phoebe looked at the note again. "I ain't soft, but I will be safe." "I'm going to get dressed," she said. Mrs. Klein's sedan crunched up the driveway at 10 a.m. sharp. The car looked pristine, a stark contrast to the mud-splattered world of the ranch. She stepped out, avoiding a puddle with a grimace. She carried her clipboard like a shield. Wade met her on the porch. He had put on a clean shirt, buttoned all the way to the top, which looked uncomfortable on his thick neck. "Mrs. Klein," he nodded. "Mr. Harlan," she replied, her eyes scanning the yard. She saw the broken fence in the distance that hadn't been fixed yet. She saw the mud. She saw the general disarray of a working ranch after a storm. She made a mark on her clipboard. "Survived the storm, I see," she said coolly. "Power was out. Generator held," Wade reported. "And the child? That was a severe weather event. For a girl with trauma history, that could be catastrophic." "She did fine," Wade said. "We'll see," Mrs. Klein said. "May I come in?" They entered the kitchen. Phoebe was sitting at the table drawing. She had the cedar box next to her. "Phoebe," Mrs. Klein said, her voice shifting to that high-pitched kid tone. "How are you, sweetie? My goodness, it looks dark in here." "I'm fine, Mrs. Klein," Phoebe said. Mrs. Klein sat down across from her, ignoring Wade. "Now, be honest with me, Phoebe. How has it been? Is it scary out here? Is it too rough?" She glanced at Wade, who was standing by the sink, his arms crossed, looking at the floor. He was letting the inspection happen. He had resigned himself to the verdict. He knew what he looked like. He knew he wasn't a minivan dad. "It's loud," Phoebe said. Mrs. Klein's pen hovered over the paper. "Loud?" he yells. "No," Phoebe said. "The wind is loud, and the floorboards squeak, and Wade's knees crack." Mrs. Klein blinked. "His knees?" "Yes," Phoebe said. She put down her pencil. "But we have rules." "Rules?" Mrs. Klein raised an eyebrow. "Strict discipline, Mr. Harlan." "House rules," Phoebe corrected. She picked up the folded paper. Mrs. Klein took the paper. She adjusted her glasses. She read the jagged handwriting. "Rule 1. Nobody yells. Rule 4. Hugs are optional." Mrs. Klein read it twice. She looked at the dollar bill in the jar. She looked at the cedar box. "What's in the box, Phoebe?" Phoebe opened the lid. Inside was a collection of small, smooth stones. "Wade brought them," Phoebe explained. "From the creek. He said stones are like people. They start out sharp and rough, but the water rolls them over and over until they get smooth. He said, we are just in the tumbling part right now." Educational moment. The metaphor of resilience. This was Wade's genius. He couldn't articulate psychology, but he understood nature. He gave Phoebe a tangible metaphor for her trauma. It wasn't damage. It was tumbling. It reframed her pain as a process of becoming smooth, not a process of being broken. Mrs. Klein looked at Wade. He was studying the ceiling tiles, his face red. "You wrote this contract?" Mrs. Klein asked him. "Yeah," Wade grumbled. "My handwriting ain't much." Mrs. Klein looked back at Phoebe. "Phoebe, look at me. Do you feel safe here?" The room went silent. The grandfather clock ticked. Phoebe looked at Mrs. Klein. Then she looked at Wade. She saw the tension in his shoulders. She saw the man who had sat on the floor and breathed with her. "Mrs. Klein," Phoebe said, her voice steady. Everyone said he was too rough. They said he was like a rock. She picked up one of the smooth river stones from the box and held it tight. But rocks are the only things that don't blow away in the storm. She looked at Wade and smiled. A real smile, one that reached her eyes. He doesn't know how to do hair, Phoebe added, but he knows how to breathe. Mrs. Klein stared at the girl. She looked at the healthy color in her cheeks. She looked at the drawing on the table. It was a picture of a horse and a small girl sitting together in a field. Slowly, Mrs. Klein lowered her clipboard. She took off her glasses. "I see," she said softly. She stood up. She walked over to Wade. She looked him up and down, but this time without the sneer of judgment. "Mr. Harlan," she said. "I apologize." Wade looked surprised. "Ma'am? I judged the book by the cover," she admitted. "I thought she needed softness. I didn't realize she needed stability. It seems you have plenty of that." She turned to the door. "I will file my report. Placement. Highly successful. I'll be back in 6 months for the standard checkup." She opened the door, then paused. "And, Mr. Harlan? There are YouTube tutorials for braiding hair. I suggest you look them up." With that, she walked out. 6 months later. The summer sun was setting over Iron Creek, painting the sky in ribbons of orange and purple. The ranch looked different. There were flower boxes on the porch, marigolds, tough flowers that could survive the wind. On the front porch, a swing had been installed. It was sturdy, built of heavy oak, hanging from thick chains. Wade sat on one side, a cup of coffee in his hand. He looked tired. It was haying season, but his face was relaxed. The deep furrow between his brows had softened. Phoebe sat on the other side. Her hair was pulled back in a braid. It was a little crooked, and one side was tighter than the other, but it held. "Wade?" "Yeah, kid." "The stars are out." Wade leaned back, the swing creaking rhythmically. "Yup, told you. Just had to wait for the clouds to clear." Phoebe pushed the swing with her foot. She wasn't holding her bear anymore. It was inside, on her bed. She didn't need to carry it everywhere now. She scooted closer to him on the bench, not touching, but close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his heavy canvas jacket. "Rule number 4, she whispered. Wade paused. He set his coffee down on the railing. He didn't rush. He remembered the contract. "I wait." He turned slightly, opening his arm, creating a space. He didn't grab. He just offered the shelter. Phoebe leaned in. She rested her head against his side. His arm closed around her shoulders, heavy and secure. He smelled of hay, diesel, and soap. It was the smell of safety. "You're still rough," Phoebe mumbled into his jacket. Wade chuckled, a low rumble that vibrated through her. "I know. Can't change the bark on an old tree." "It's okay," Phoebe said, closing her eyes. "I like the bark." Wade looked out at the horizon, at the endless Wyoming plains that were no longer empty. He realized that Mrs. Klein had been wrong, and the town had been wrong, but he had been wrong too. He hadn't just saved a girl. The girl had saved him from a life of silence. "I ain't going anywhere, Phoebe," he whispered to the stars. "I know," she replied. And high above Iron Creek, the wind blew, but down on the porch, everything was still. Everything was safe. Narrator voiceover. We often confuse love with softness. We think kindness must always be gentle, and that healing requires a delicate touch. But sometimes, love is a calloused hand that refuses to let go. Sometimes, healing is a fortress that stands in the storm. Wade proved that you don't have to be soft to be loving. You just have to be safe. And in a world that is often chaotic and loud, perhaps safety is the rarest and most beautiful form of love there is. Thank you for listening to this story. If you believe that strength comes in many forms, Please like this video and share it with someone who needs a reminder that they are safe. See you in the next story.